What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are back to take a look at another draft pick for the Detroit Lions in the 2022 NFL Draft as we continue to work our way through all the Lions to draft picks this season. Then we'll head into the UDFAs. In our last video, we took a look at the Lions' last pick in this year's draft, Chase Lucas, the cornerback out of Arizona State with pick number 234. And today we continue that with the Lions' second to last pick, still in the 200s. So let's get it started.
217th pick in the 2022 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select James Houston, linebacker from Jackson State.
Welcome, everybody, to our video. Glad you guys are here. Hopefully you like that little kind of like intro thing. I think that's a cool idea. Like, I'll play the clip. Now, actually, I'm not going to lie. Okay, I was unable to actually get the clip. I don't think I've told Rad this, but when we did our video last week and we had the Chase Lucas and I put that little clip in there saying the Detroit Lions select, that kind of thing, that wasn't actually the Chase Lucas pick. That was actually this pick for James Houston out of Jackson State. I was unable to actually get the Chase Lucas pick because as I pulled out my phone to record it, Rad called me. Seriously, this is fact. Rad called me. He actually was FaceTiming me. And I couldn't like hang up and get the video out before I tried to decline. I was going to call him back, but I'm trying to decline. And I couldn't get my phone out and have it start recording. It was like jacked up. I'm like, oh my goodness, I missed the pick. So yeah, last week's when you saw that little short, it was actually this pick. So I probably played a little bit more just now. But yeah, James Houston is who we're taking a look at today, the linebacker. So I would actually say edge rusher out of Jackson State. This was definitely the guy that I knew the least about when we drafted. I had a little bit of background knowledge on pretty much everybody that we took, just a very little bit on Chase Lucas. And if you guys want to go check that out, definitely go for it. We put some chapters in there. We broke it down. We're going to do a similar thing today with James Houston, the fourth. But this is a guy that, man, I really knew like nothing about when we selected him. You guys in the chat were like, hey, he was, with Deion Sanders and he balled out there last season at Jackson State. That's really all the background I had. I mean, I had to look and be like, okay, I know there was like nothing I really knew about this player. I didn't know that he was at Florida before he went to Jackson State. I didn't really know what kind of role we were going to use him in. And still right now, I think there's a ton of versatility even after watching him. But he was one of the more interesting prospects that I've watched, before the draft and including Chase Lucas. Very interesting because I'm still not exactly sure what role the Lions put him in, but I think I have a good sense on how he could be very successful in this Lions defense or where he would find his most success because it was really like this. It was really a roller coaster watching his game. James Houston is a 23-year-old draft pick for the Detroit Lions. So yeah, a little bit, I guess, on the older side coming out of college. He started off at the University of Florida, committing there as a 3-star recruit coming out over teams like Michigan, South Carolina. So he goes to Florida. Apparently, he misses his freshman season due to credit card fraud. However, he did still spend a pretty good amount of time with Florida for the next 3 seasons, 2018, 19, and 20. However, he was pretty on and off the field. We did see him on special teams, which is actually something that Brad Holmes brought up as value because when you get these late round picks, really they work their way on first on special teams. And we've seen that value for him going back to Florida. But in terms of on the field defensively, he was definitely rotational there. I don't know if I love the role that they were using him in specifically. We'll get to that. Jackson State was definitely much different, but we'll get to all that. Point is, he was with Florida for 3 more seasons, played there, put up some production. As a career, he had 103 total tackles, 4.5 sacks, and 4 forced fumbles, which is something to know. He has had a little bit of a knack for kind of knocking the ball out. And he entered the transfer portal, and apparently the reason that he entered the transfer portal was because he wanted a bigger opportunity. Now, as we know, he ended up transferring to Jackson State, but from what I've read, that was not the team that immediately stuck out to him. It was like, yeah, I want to go to Jackson State. Jackson State was just very interested in him very early in the process, and eventually they were able to talk him into that. And there were still some big schools that were interested in him when he was deciding to transfer out of Florida, right? It wasn't just, the Jackson States and things like that. There were bigger schools that were still interested in him. However, he did decide ultimately to go to Jackson State, and we saw this past season his production just kind of went crazy. The guy had 16.5, okay? I'm not making this up. 16.5 sacks last season at Jackson State. He also had 24.5 tackles for loss and over 50 solo tackles. Florida with the role that he was getting. And I think in some of those games that I watched, he was actually the better linebacker. Miller was taking a lot of his reps there. The Florida defense did see some schematic movements throughout the season as at the beginning of the year, they were getting killed. This is why he was such a fun watch because you saw so much change within how he was being utilized and where he may thrive at the next level and where his best fit may be. but he just didn't get consistent opportunity at Florida, and that's going to be really tough to get, picked up by an NFL team if you're not even the starter on that team. So he goes to Jackson State, bets on himself, goes to a different role. He looked much lighter at Jackson State. He was listed at about 244 at Florida. He looked at about 225, 230 at Jackson State, and he went crazy. Just playing an edge role where it was like, hey, get downhill, get after the quarterback. We're going to push you on the edge, and you're going to rush the passer. And it was just almost as simple as that, and his production went insane. And a lot of times, he just looked like the way better athlete every single time on the edge. So they made it simple. Hey, get after the quarterback. And he absolutely dominated in that role. And that led to, some of these bowl games, specifically the East and West Shrine Bowl, which Brad Holmes brought up, is where they kind of took notice of him, was at that game. And then you see the role that they're using him there, which was different than what he played at Jackson State. And it really ties everything together when you watch the film from Florida to Jackson State to the East and West Shrine Bowl. And you're like, okay, I kind of got a sense of where I think this guy could be really good or have an impact in the NFL. But with that being said, I do feel like there's tons of flexibility here, and we know that is very valuable. So we're going to try to figure out where we think the Lions may look to utilize this guy. We know they had a plan when they drafted, and there was some sort of plan out there. We'll see how it ends up playing out. I'm sure they want to see the guy in their building first, because like James Houston said, the Lions really weren't showing interest until they drafted him. So this wasn't a guy that, according to James Houston, they had tons of contact with. They were like, hey, we like you, things like that, because he came on to them at, the East and West Shrine Bowl, which is after the season is already over. You're talking about leading up to the NFL Super Bowl. Before we do that, let's take a look at his relative athletic score. We do this with, every draft pick. So let's take a look at it. Now, for James Houston, I believe this all took place at his pro day, so we know none of the timing and stuff is official, like the 40-yard dash time, like it may be at the combine, because I have seen different numbers thrown out there than what we see by the relative athletic score that's given, saying that he's running a 4.74. I've also seen it thrown out there that the guy ran a 4.63 at his pro day. So we're not exactly sure on that, but the numbers that we are given, as you can see here, by his relative athletic score, first thing that sticks out to me is the arm length. I will make a very big note of that. 34.5-inch arms. Now, I've seen from multiple sources saying 34.25-inch arms. Regardless, that's like that much of a difference. The point is, those are very, very long arms. You do feel like you want to continue to put him on the edge like he was at Jackson State. Absolutely has the arm length to do so. 6 foot tall. I may have read that wrong. Just over 6 foot tall. So definitely in terms of height, on the shorter side, especially if you're looking for a guy to play on the edge, but extremely long arms. So it's a very interesting build for James Houston. 244, 22 bench press reps, which is pretty nice, especially if you're playing off-ball linebacker. That's not a bad number at all to put up there. But here's where he sticks out. The explosion grade, 39-inch vertical. So once again, like Chase Lucas, very explosive. 39-inch vertical, a 10.5 broad jump, which is impressive, and a 10-yard split at 1.56. You see his agility scores didn't come in as well. His three-cone drill was not great. His shuttle score is not great there. Long arms, explosive. Those are the things that stick out to me. Now, when you go back and you watch him at Florida, if you watch him at Florida, he definitely looks more of a 244 kind of guy. That's what he looks like. That looks like how he's built. However, when you watch him at Jackson State, it's been reported that he was weighing about 20 less pounds, and it definitely looks like that when you watch him, just by his build. And it also looks like that at the East-West Shrine Bowl, that maybe not 225, but maybe less than 244. Maybe he's in the 230 range. That's what he looks like to me. Talk about his frame. Does he have the frame to add on weight if you wanted to make him a pure edge and you said, hey, he needs to get bigger? Absolutely. Yeah, I think he could play at 255. I mean, he has the frame for it. He has the broad shoulders. He has the wide hips. He has the frame that I think you could bulk him up to 255. And he still showed explosiveness at Florida, even when he looked much heavier, like at the 245. But he wasn't as explosive, okay, to me, when you watched him at Jackson State. We take a look at run defense first. I'm going to keep it pretty darn simple. Those athletic traits definitely show up, good and bad. They show up pretty darn instantly when you watch his film. And you look at Florida, like I said, he did look a little bit bulkier. He did look like he weighed a little more. He looked a little bit less explosive when you watched him. But very quickly, I came to the realization that this is not a guy that you want to sit, read and react as a linebacker. This is not a guy that you want to have blockers get up on him. Go back and watch his games at Florida. You start at the beginning of the season in 2020. You're seeing games against the Missouris, the Texas A&Ms, things like that. And you're watching him and you're seeing a guy that, both of their linebackers, their entire defense, they really struggled at the beginning of the season. They started to improve as the season went on. We'll talk about that in a second. But defensively, they were getting gashed, especially against the run. And you're watching him, he's playing more of like a read and react type of role where it looks like they're trying to two-gap up front, but at the same time, He's not jumping off the snap. He's not attacking. He's sitting, waiting. He's almost just waiting until he sees the football before he even moves. So the blockers are already moving. He's not moving yet. He's waiting on linemen. Linemen are getting to him at the second level. Their two gaps are not holding up very well. Linemen are getting him at the second level. He's not stacking and shedding, but to even make it worse, he's really struggling trying to fill lanes, clog lanes, and it was just disastrous at the beginning of the season. I mean, he almost looked like he was just completely unimpactful at the beginning of the season. I was like, wow, this does not at all look like a draftable player. I'm just being honest. He did not at all look like that. But as you saw as the season started to go on, you get to games like Alabama. You know, you start to see some changes, and they were mixing it up throughout the season. I'm sure they did. You know, I think their defense coordinator got fired after that 2020 season. He came in, it was like, hey, he's going to run a 3-4-1 gap. But anyway, as the season goes on, you see teams like Alabama, and you're starting to see a little bit more of an aggressive style from both linebackers, specifically from this whole defense. Shooting gaps, getting downhill, playing more attacking. And you're watching him, and he's starting to show some more impact defensively. Now, remember, this was 2020. He's still, you know, not having tons of reps. So it's still an experience thing that you do have to throw out there with him. But you're starting to see him react much quicker. And then you're just getting these flashes of him being the first guy to move off the line, which kind of gives you an idea of instincts, trusting himself. But then at the same time, is he putting himself in the right position? You're starting to see him jump some plays. You look at the athletic scores. You see that 10-yard split. It does not lie. Even at 240, whatever he was playing at Florida, he looked very explosive in that first step. And there was multiple flashes of he's the first guy off the line of scrimmage. And instead of sitting back and almost just waiting to see, okay, where's the football at before I make a move, you start to see him jumping on things a lot quicker. He's interesting because I definitely think there's going to be some development that's needed here for sure, okay? I mean, this is a player that just experience-wise, depending on what role you're going to play him in, if you do like him as an off-ball backer, though, he's going to need some time for sure to develop as a run defender. Got long arms, right? But he doesn't use his hands extremely well. A lot of times he doesn't lock out, create space between an offensive lineman. He's not very good at using his hands at that point of contact, where if he's sitting back and he's taking a blocker head on, even if that's a tight end, he doesn't always disengage with that blocker. But when you talk about filling lanes, there also is sort of a tunnel vision when he gets eyes of the ball carrier, especially outside the tackle box. Watch him as a run defender. He definitely takes the idea of shortest distance to the ball carrier to the next level. Okay, that's exactly how he plays when he was playing off-ball linebacker, of who has outside contain here, because if they have the edge contain, I'm going to take this very short path to the ball carrier. Now, sometimes you would see that running back would maybe get outside the edge contain, but that wasn't necessarily his fault because that wasn't his responsibility. You say, well, maybe he should have been wider on that play, but that's just how he plays. He takes the shortest distance to the running back. He sees the football, he's going to the football, he's going to take the shortest distance. But you also see the flip side as well, understanding if I have to get the outside here, I can do that. But where he has an issue, I think, is stringing it together, where it's take on the blocker, but also take my contain. Specifically, we're talking off-ball linebacker here. And at the same time, if that running back comes by me, getting off the block and making a play. And that's where he needs to improve, using that length, using his hands to try to create that distance. Lions have kind of told us is that's what they're going to be doing this season, is be more of an aggressive front. And that makes a ton of sense because to me, as James Houston, yes, if your defensive line can hold their two-gap responsibilities, he can be fine here, but that's not necessarily playing to where I think he could really thrive and stand out, is being in a downhill defense. I think so when he was lined up on the edge of Jackson State, there were definitely instances where he did lose edge contain, aggressive to make a play on the football. So if you have him, you know, hey, you got to set the edge on this situation, especially when you saw him play edge at Jackson State, there were times where he wouldn't get out there and a guy would completely run around where he's probably supposed to be forcing that back inside the tackle box into his defenders, where he doesn't get that force contain. Instead, he allows it right outside him. So that showed up specifically, I think, from the edge position. Sometimes blockers catch him by surprise because he gets completely locked on to where the back and where the ball is. Here comes the blocker, picks him up, and there's this huge gap right next to him. He just takes off through there. You start to see him start to key on offensive line movement and any kind of pulling movement post-snap versus what you saw at the beginning of the season at Florida, where he was waiting on everything and just waiting until he saw the ball carrier. You start to see him start to key on certain movements, all right? Specifically, anybody that's pulling, any tight end, any offensive lineman, any wide receiver that would pull his direction post-snap, if it was coming his direction, that's where he was going. Now, that would get him into trouble at times, but it would also put him in a good spot at times because he wouldn't be focused on where the ball is, so he wouldn't get lost like other players, and he'd find himself in a good spot because he's following the polling guy, and usually that takes you to the football. But it could get him into trouble at times where you have a decoy, you have someone pull, it comes in pass coverage as well, where, you know, that kind of eye candy, it will pull him. So it's a very interesting situation because at one point you're seeing this downhill guy, but before that you're seeing a guy that's much more read and react, right? He's pretty darn patient, you know, trying to find the ball carrier in her seat. He's usually not getting, you know, sucked into things or losing where the football is at. He was actually reading at the mesh point, you know, before he starts doing this attacking downhill thing. However, it's not really playing to his strengths, which is that 10-yard split. It is that explosiveness. It is the aggression downhill. Instead, he's more so waiting on plays where you saw it benefit him when runs got outside the tackle box, but he was struggling with taking on the blockers at the second level. The defensive line was struggling trying to do what they were asking to do. His eyes looked a lot better. He was just much slower to get into place. However, then you see this guy that starts to attack downhill. When it comes to attacking blockers, it's more evading blockers, which really fit his skill set, and that's why I think he translated so well to playing this edge role. So combine this with zone blocking schemes, and to me, this is where he's actually at his best. He is extremely dominant against any kind of zone blocking scheme, whether it's a mid zone, a wide zone, off the backside, towards whatever it is. Zone block scheme specifically off the backside, however. Zone blocking rushes against him, he is outstanding here. And you saw this in the East to West Shrine Bowl immediately, but you also saw it in some of his games with Florida, where if you have a run play, again, especially off the backside, but as soon as he starts to key on the offensive line, setting up a zone run play, especially if there's no pulling offensive lineman there that's going to throw him off, he is so fast to jump through those gaps. It allows him to use his strength, which is that 10-yard split. It's that explosiveness. It's that closing burst. And he gets downhill extremely fast. I mean, he meets running backs in the backfield. And again, he plays with that kind of loose cannon mentality where he doesn't care. He's going to hit you. And that you're going to hear it. You're going to feel it. You're going to hear it through the TV. But at the same time, when he tackles, he's also a pretty good tackler. I mean, you get your occasional missed tackle in here, but usually it's because he puts himself in a bad spot. He can't get himself squared up. He's free and he's got a clear lane. You know, he'll usually get low and he'll make a really nice tackle. And he consistently leads with his shoulder, shows a wrap up. But there are occasions where he can come in a little bit too high, a bit reckless, where you don't see maybe some of that lower body agility. He won't get himself very cleanly broke down sometimes. And that's where you'll see missed tackles. He hits with a lot of authority. He puts his shoulder pad like right on the legs of the ball carrier, and it stops the movement instantly. It just stops. You saw it against Robinson at Bama. You saw it against Kentucky's running back. It just stops the movement in the legs. There is no leg drive. It's just like, boom, he hit a brick wall. However, they can reach out and, you know, reach a little further because he goes low so they can move their upper body and stretch out. That is something. But man, he hits it like a wall in the lower body. And to move back to an area where he could improve, and I think this is something that may be an issue, may not be an issue in the NFL. It could be something that just takes time. But there were a lot of occasions where him communicating with other defenders before a play, before a snap, may not be his fault exactly. When trying to communicate with others defensively, there was a lot of times where they didn't get that communication through. The ball was snapped, and he was very late to the party. That happened multiple times in multiple games. And showed this play that I really liked. Gave me some Trayvon Walker vibes. They showed that Trayvon Walker played a ton where he was like running a guy down an open field, where here's an example of that from James Houston, basically doing the exact same thing. The ball is completely on the other side of the field. I believe this is against Missouri. I don't see the clip as you're seeing it right now, but you can see he works his way across the entire field and makes his play on the sideline. And I'd say for the most part, I thought his effort was really good. I mean, now there was a couple times where I don't think it was an effort issue as much as it was confusion, being a little bit lost. He's just a downhill, go get the football type of guy. I mean, he's not a guy that I want to have sitting back doing things, because whenever that seemed to show up, and this all showed up in coverage, that's when it started to see some confusion. There was a ton of confusion in coverage for sure. We'll get to that. But that's when he starts to look a little bit slower. But you allow him to play downhill, he starts to look like the best athlete on the field at times. So you said when it comes to taking on blockers, that's an area where he struggles and filling lanes through that. However, he is pretty slippery though, and again, he's aggressive. So if he's not focused on taking on the blocker, he's more focused on getting downhill, getting to the ball carrier, and a blocker shows up, he's pretty slippery. So you see a lot of swim moves, you think things overhands, you see a lot of that kind of thing, which is probably why he translated so well to playing edge. And at the same time, just the aggression. Like if there's a blocker in his way and he's chasing the ball, he's just going to put his shoulder down and try to run through you. It's just like that. That's just the mentality that he plays with. May not always be the most clean thing, and he probably could be a little bit more clean here. But again, if he's working downhill and not sitting and waiting and trying to hold the block, rather coming downhill, rather playing the backside, chasing something down, the blocker gets in his way, all of a sudden he's either very slippery or he's just running through whoever that guy is that's in his way. Kind of transition that to pass coverage, again, talking about the off-ball linebacker role. You didn't see this as much when he's playing on the edge. When you talk about pass coverage, this is an area where I don't love him. I think there's some qualities that could help him depending on the role that you put him in. You have to keep in mind, right? We're watching him at Florida. So if he's a little bit lighter, he may move a little bit better. You see him in the East-West Shrine Bowl, he definitely looked like a much better mover. Now, I'm not going to say he looked like, man, he's just covering up guys. But he definitely looked a little bit more agile, a little bit easier in change of direction, a little bit smoother in the back pedal. However, it's not something I can say from what I've seen as a strength. Let's focus mainly on what I saw at Florida. The guy's coverage is not great. Let's start with zone coverage. It's where I don't love him. First off, his back pedal is very unimpactful. I wouldn't even know how to word it. He just doesn't get much depth in terms of his back pedal. It's usually pretty high cut, doesn't get a lot of depth in his back pedal. It can take a little bit of a second to transition his back pedal, whether it's trying to turn and run. That's a very kind of hefty transition for him. I didn't like his back pedal. I didn't think it was very fluid. So where he played a lot of his zone coverage, from what I've seen, is a lot almost like a, I guess you could almost call it like a half turn. A lot of times he would kind of just put his back almost to the quarterback, play half the field in zone coverage, and just kind of wall off anybody crossing his path that way. Definitely limited for sure in ball production. I believe I saw a stat, don't know if it's true, 23 for 27 for 2 touchdowns was allowed in coverage at Florida because he doesn't see both quarterback and man. In zone coverage, he's more about just kind of walling off your guy. Now, if he can turn and run and cover a drag, that's fine. He can do that. And you do have that closing speed. So it's more of a catch and limit what happens after. And that's the case with a lot of linebackers. Not a playmaker in coverage. He's not. But he is one of those guys where if he catches it, he can close that gap quickly and not allow additional yardage after the catch is made underneath. He closes the gap very fast. He looked even faster in doing that at the East-West Shrine Bowl. But I would assume even if he is lighter and he is more a fluid mover, it's going to take some time for him in this department where on third downs, if he's on the field, I would assume he's pass rushing, not much more than that. Because there were multiple examples of confusion in coverage.
Now, of course, we don't know the exact defensive call, but you do see coverage breakdowns like this where, not saying this is Houston's fault necessarily, it was a good job by the offense to have the inline tight end, go up and work vertical here. But you can see instead of getting out to the running back, he's following up the seam with the number 2 receiver. And then on this play, you have a wide open running back running into the flat. There could be a situation where he takes that number 2 receiver up the seam, but as they lined it up, there was some communication confusion defensively, and you have a wide open running back.
Play actions gave him a big time problem. He's keying on these pulling movements, things like that, where anytime there was play action and RPO, definitely could give him problems. And when that became the case, usually he was pretty much lost at that point, where it wasn't like, okay, I know where I'm at. He would turn around and be kind of in no man's land. He takes the eye candy. That's how I wrote it. He takes the eye candy.
But sometimes you're just beat schematically, and here's one where Florida's caught in quarters coverage, and they're running basically 2 deep posts on the left side, and they have this underneath route by Devontae Smith behind the linebackers, and you have your linebacker passing it off to nobody here because your 2 cornerbacks, your cornerback and safety, were already pulled out of the play.
Now, man coverage, there is some potential here, specifically if you keep his role simple. If you put him on a flat and a running back, he can do that. And you saw it again, East-West Shrine Bowl looked a lot better at doing this, and he even looked fine at it in Florida, but he looked a lot better here because of the speed, the closing burst, probably better straight line speed. He can run with some of these running backs out in the flats, or if the tight end runs up the seam. He's a physical guy through coverage, but it does limit the quarterback taking chances to throw at his direction. He's physical, has adequate speed to run up the seam with guys. It's just about that transition. Backpedal to flipping his hips, turning and running definitely is not the smoothest thing I've seen. Even then in man coverage, when let's say he is trying to run with a tight end up the seam, if he gets that connection with him and he sort of gets in his pocket, next thing he'll probably have to add is trying to find a way to get his head turned around. That way he could be a little bit more of a playmaker at the catch point rather than kind of what he is now, which is a physical, let me kind of get in your way, throw you off your route a little bit, rather than let me get my head turned around and try to make a play on the football. Right now, it's just kind of, hey, wherever I'm at, that's where I'm at. And it may look awkward. I may not see the quarterback at all, but I'm kind of just in the way right now. Now, when he's able to play a little bit like off-man coverage, meaning maybe 5 yards off the line, he's covering an out route, and instead of having to, backpedal, turn, and try to run with somebody, he's able to keep kind of the play a little bit in front of him, across from him. You do see a little bit of that closing burst like we see as a run defender, but you see some of that burst to work his way back into the play. And when he does that, when it's not very complex, let's say just an out route, and yeah, he's a little bit behind, you do see him get his head back to the quarterback, which gives you a little optimism there, right? He's not completely locked on. He does find a way to get his head back to the quarterback. So it's definitely a technical thing. He didn't seem extremely agile in coverage, so I don't think it'll be a strong suit. But again, if he's lighter, I mean, who really knows, because we haven't seen many reps of that. But I will give him some flowers, just a little bit, for zone coverage instincts. And this is something that, you know, it's frustrating when you're watching linebackers and they're in a zone and they don't put their arms up or they don't jump when it passes by them. I'm not talking at the line of scrimmage. I'm talking 10 yards down the field, which is, he doesn't do anything. This guy will jump up, put his arm up, understanding my vertical, my arm reach, my arm length. I can at least kind of be just a wall. So that's what he is right now. He's just more of a, I'm going to try to get in your way kind of guy rather than a playmaker in coverage. If he does get to a position where he can run up the seam with a tight end, he can absolutely do that. I don't want him on receivers very often, but it's adequate. So if I was playing him as a Sam and I need him to bump the tight end off the line, right, to get physical, then turn and run up the seam, he can absolutely do that. So I could see that being a role that you try to ask him to do. Just for me, the coverage thing is a very weird projection for him because he needs more experience here. You don't know what he's going to be weighing. Fun part has to come with pass rush because of what he did last season. Now, if he's going to be playing off-ball linebacker and he's on the field on third down, I would almost bet 95%, 99% of the time he's probably rushing the quarterback. Okay, he can sit on the running back flat. He could probably spy a little bit. But beyond that, if he's on the field on third down, I want him rushing the quarterback no matter where I put him. Whatever matchup, if that's the interior, if that's on the edge, whatever it is, that's what I want him doing because his pass rush ability is very exciting. And we talked about it. He's pretty slippery, you know, working off the backside against the run, you know, things like that when he's just working downhill. Very instinctive, quick reactions. It was reported that, like I said, he was weighing about 20 pounds less than what he did at Florida. That is an extremely slim man playing on the edge. Clearly, there was an advantage here. He was just too athletic a lot of times for tackles off the line of scrimmage. But what he really does well is kind of the stop and start. It's that explosiveness to set up a tackle, change pace, slow down, and turn it on. And he's just by a tackle that quick. Swipes well, swim moves well, and he's got pretty powerful hands. It's the stop and start that sticks out. He also has some upper body flexibility for sure. Dip the edge, that's very possible within his game. He has some really nice upper body flexibility where he can sink his shoulders underneath an offensive tackle, underneath an offensive lineman. Jackson State would do this sometime, push him between the tackles and let him rush that way because he's extremely aggressive. He just runs through running backs with no hesitation whatsoever. That's just how he plays, and it's that closing burst that really makes him tough for anybody to handle on the offensive line, and that's what made it tough. They went to slime protection his side, help his side, and he could still get around the edge with that because of his stop and start, because he didn't have to come off the line. He could kind of come off slowly and then start and then just get around you. And if he did open up an offensive tackle, because of that twitchiness around the edge, he also had the ability to work back inside to counter inside, but not slip and fall all the time. Like, there was some flexibility for sure to do that, and I think that stems from when you see the ability from inside the tackle box, where he's able to change directions. As I said, he plays on his toes, plays very low, because he can change directions where he can get you to open up as a tackle, and he can slide back inside and get pass rushed that way. Now, I do think he lacks a little bit of ankle flexion, really corner, where you do see him slip and fall there.
Now, I definitely don't think we'll see him convert much speed to power in the NFL, but inside, outside winning, the stop and start, look at the knee bend here to really sink, and you see it in the East-West Shrine Bowl. I mean, honestly, you might as well take a chance on this guy just because of this ability.
Pass rush style does give me some Majay Sanders vibes, or even some Nick Bonito in there a little bit, where Bonito, you know, you saw some occasions of speed to power using that length, and you saw that. I think that's going to happen even less for this guy, especially if he comes in at, you know, sub 240 pounds. I don't see that happening very often, but it is really all about leverage there. I mean, you get an offensive lineman overset, then feet get all out of whack, and then you punch him in the chest, and he has those long arms to possibly create that separation where he's able to get to the backfield and get by an offensive tackle. But that ability to win with the flexibility that he has, and to get a guy this late that's that productive, that was productive at the East-West Shrine Bowl, no matter what your size is, if you can be productive in that way, no matter how it has to happen, that is a very expensive ability to have in the National Football League. That goes a long way. And I love the fact that he was compared to Micah Parsons here, because for the Lions, see this guy playing weak side defensive end for the Lions every single down. Now, I guess if they balked him up, they could try it, but I don't see that being the case. But having that flexibility to have him rush the quarterback like he can, because it's not just like he can rush the quarterback. It's like he is really good at rushing the quarterback. And that was the same thing with Micah. Competition, way better, of course. But I think the flexibility to kind of line him inside, he's going to be fearless. Having that length to line up on the edge, the stop and start, the ham swipes, the lower body flexibility to really sink and keep his balance when working from outside inside, the stop and start where even if they throw a tight end or a running back on your side, you don't have to win with that initial jump off the line. You can kind of change a pace on the offensive tackle. All of those things could make you extremely valuable, and that ability alone could have really sold the Lions like, hey, hold up, we might have to just get this guy. There's no question that this guy, you could believe, yeah, he might be just impactful if I put him out there as an edge and let him rush the quarterback. And you can see why his traits would make it very easy for him to translate. First off, he's just a great athlete, super fast, very twitchy, which tackles are going to struggle with, just like tackles struggle with Benito. And now you're talking about he's playing, at Jackson State, Oklahoma versus Jackson State. It's a very big difference. These guys are really struggling to handle him off the edge, and his production was nuts. Certain games, he did take over. He absolutely took over. He'd have multiple sacks, multiple chase down sacks, the closing burst. You couldn't run away from the guy. What role do I see for James Houston? Well, that's the most interesting part. And here's why, this is why he was so fun to watch, trying to figure out how the Lions would look to utilize him. And you listen to Brad Holmes, and he kind of just talked about, yeah, he's versatile. He's a guy that can line up on the edge. He can play off-ball linebacker like he did at Florida. He came on to us at the East-West Shrine Bowl. So to me, if that's where he grabs your attention, which he really grabbed my attention quick, there's some of those hits I was just like, oh my gosh. And you see how he's moving in coverage, looks a lot better at that weight, which is, it looked like 230 to me, around that range. Role, I think, will be interesting here. I think the Lions could go different ways with this. I also think this could make sense to have him play as a Sam backer. I know a lot of people are saying, well, 3-4 edge, outside linebacker. We heard the Lions say 4-3, but even Aaron Glenn's like, yeah, that's overrated, right? We have what we have. We're just going to play to those strengths. We just want to put guys in positions to be successful. We'll put whatever label you want on him. I think when you look at a player like this, based on his skill set, not what he played, what's his skill set, I think he's got a really nice skill set too. Potentially down the road, be a nice little off-ball linebacker for you, but I like maybe a little bit of a hybrid role here, and he may be competing with a guy like Jared Davis for this role, which is like a Sam backer, a guy that I can walk up to the line of scrimmage, and this is more right now, I guess, but a guy that I can walk up to the line of scrimmage, where we almost get some like 5-man fronts, it looks like, a guy I can walk up on the line, have him rush off the edge, I can have him back up, to line with all the other off-ball linebackers, in a 4-3 defensive look, but he can also jam tight ends off the line, he can run with them vertically. He can get out into the flats with his just straight line speed. More of an early down role for me, so I can try to keep him out of some of those pass coverage situations. Allow him to play downhill against the run. Maybe even, I don't know what he's going to come in as. I would say I'd like to have him be around a 230, 235 range. Whatever he was at East-West Shrine Bowl, I like that weight for him. And we saw at that game, they would put him on the edge on third down. I like the role. I think you play him as an off-ball. I think a Sam role would be kind of cool, playing him like your strong side backer. It just depends on the package, right? If you're in sub packages consistently, do I want him as one of my 2 inside linebackers? I don't really know if I want that. Not right now, I don't think I do. I think I'd rather go with what I have. He'd be a backup. He could develop into that possibly down the road. But maybe on some of those sub packages, I think on sub packages, passing downs, I bring him into pass rush. But if I'm going to put him out there on early downs, I think some heavier sets, play him as a strong side backer. But if I can play him in kind of that hybrid role where I can walk him up on the line and rush the quarterback that way, think of a Zach Bond, possibly with New Orleans Saints. I know it hasn't worked out extremely well to this point. He hasn't played a ton, but when you drafted Zach Bond, right, Saints, where Aaron Glenn was, they drafted him when Aaron Glenn was there. He's coming out of Wisconsin. He's a 12.5 sack guy, like our guy. He's a guy that can drop into coverage. So he's kind of playing like that hybrid linebacker type of role. I almost view some similarities to that and Jared Davis, who I also could compete as a strong side linebacker. If you want to keep weight on him, and you feel more comfortable with him being at like 240 to play that role, I think it's perfectly fine. But think of Derek Barnes, his very long arms. They like that for attacking downhill to shed blocks. That's what I also see here, but we know that can translate to edge. It's kind of like Derek Barnes in reverse, if you will, right? Derek Barnes was an edge, and then he went to off-ball, and now he's playing off-ball for us. And you have this guy who was an off-ball, he's going to edge. What's he going to play for us? At the East-West Shrine Bowl, where he got the Lions' attention, it wasn't him lining consistently at defensive end. It was him lining as an off-ball backer. So I'm going to think he's a developmental off-ball backer that could compete with Jared Davis for the strong side role, give you special teams impact like Brad Holmes brought up like he did at Florida. And on pass downs, if you need another pass rusher, put him on the field. I would not be afraid to put him on the field, especially in preseason, because if he starts lighting it up, don't be afraid to. Deion Sanders compared him to Micah Parsons. And again, you have to get creative with that. Micah Parsons, you could just line him at defensive end and probably rush the guy. Dallas did, get creative. He looks like he's clearly at his best getting downhill, right? And I know he's a little bit undersized to be a pure defensive end, so allow him to try to play a little clean off the edge, which is guys like Josh Pascal are so important, but allow him to walk up like a Micah Parsons, rush the edge. That's what I really like the role fit here for. Good length, showing some pass rush arsenal already, showing flexibility, the aggressiveness, the demeanor, ability to drop, play running backs, things like that. I like that role for him. Well, let's see what the Lions do, though, because they could look at him and be like, yeah, he's a defensive end. I don't know. Todd Wash is like that. He may just be like, look, he's a DN. Let him work as a DN. And hey, if you think he is, then that's fine. I mean, he'll take time there, but he's going to have time because he has guys in front of him. But I think it's more of a versatile role that they're looking at here, which in today's NFL, you need the versatility. See that pass rush ability? I legit think this could be a home run pick. I mean, I really do. And I think it's a high reward, low risk because of where you took the guy at in the draft. So I don't want to sound like a crazy broken record here. I'm giving him a 5.5 draft grade where I think he's inconsistent, trying to figure out his role. But man, he has traits that are super, super exciting. But I think when you talk about where you got him at in the draft, it's hard not to give it. I mean, you have to get. It's hard for me not to give it an A because I just really feel like the upside, the swing for the fences here, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But these other guys that I'm looking at, these names that I'm peeking at right now, no one on here to me, at least at a similar position, screams that high of a ceiling as what this guy possibly has at that spot. So again, the only guys I would rather take in here, maybe the tackle, or again, you could have possibly been quarterback, but especially for this spot, I'm not mad that we didn't do another wide receiver. Bo Melton was sitting out there. I think he'll be interesting, but I still don't love his hands necessarily. And there's also the side that you hate to think about, but it may not work. And you look at a Chase Lucas, and I gave him a higher draft prospect grade than I'm giving James Houston. I know he went later, but I feel like he's much like if I put Chase Lucas in the game tomorrow and I needed to at corner, I wouldn't be super concerned. He was also in the East-West Shrine Bowl, and he made some plays in that game as well. If I put this guy, I really don't know where I'm putting him. This dude could take a while. We may not see him much this year. It could be a year down the road before he starts to make an impact. I think he'll make an impact somewhat this season, but at the same time, it's hard for me to not look at it, especially just the players around. We'll see. I'm going to go through Malcolm and things like that, but with where he was taken, he seems to have by far the highest ceiling. Like this guy could be an absolute home run pick. I'm not saying best value because value based on position, how impactful they are this year, not that kind of thing. I'm just saying home run in general. He could pan out to be an absolute dynamite player in the National Football League because, man, you just don't find linebackers that can pass rush that well. Like there's one thing to say, they can blitz. It's another thing to say he's got pass rush ability, pass rush moves. That's special. That is very special. Man, he looks special in the East-West Shrine Bowl. So that's kind of where I am with this one. It could be very exciting if the Lions find a way to use him right because this skill set is very legit. Thank you for watching, and I'm out.